101.1 FM and AM 1160 WCCS.
Indiana in the morning, good morning to you. Glad that you're with us here today on this Friday morning, 7:45. It's a quarter away from 8 o'clock. Mr. Bob Pollock is with us from the extension. You can give him a call, 479-1160, 349-WCCS. If you have a question for Bob about lawns and gardens and trees and such, our visit is presented by Marcus & Mack, voted the best law firm and best personal injury lawyer 3 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com. Don't know if you're aware of it or not, Bob, but there were some storms this week.
A little bit aware.
And a lot of the damage, most of it, caused by trees going down on lines, which there's a very extensive program from both REA and Pollock to keep those lines clear. And they're doing what they can, but it's going to happen. Healthy trees even are going to fall over on lines, and we've seen that happen. But let's talk a little bit about tree health. And when you see the storms and the branches start coming down, and some of those branches that are coming down aren't the healthiest branches in the world. It's not like it's a nice, robust limb that has been shorn off. They're rotted limbs and branches that have come down because of the winds and the rains and everything like that. What can we do when we have a limb that is very, very high up, or a bunch of them, and they're not viable anymore? We can't get them out of there until the storm comes along.
Well, you can get them out of there if you hire an arborist to come in and prune those dead branches out proactively. That? Yes, there are people that do that. Mm-hmm. Actually, tree maintenance, tree care, it's like a lot of things. Things left to their own sometimes can be okay. And there's a whole lot of other things that we have to care for along the way.
Yeah, but we don't think of that the way that we might some other nuisance.
Yeah, that's true. However, and out in the woods, it's not practical to do that. Mm-hmm. Things get taken care of as things happen out in the woods. But in our yards, different area, different thinking needs to be there. Maintenance, that goes back to all the way back to selecting and placing things. Designing that landscape, thoughtfully going through the process of, well, where should I put this? And then if I need something here, what is it that will work there? What is it that will get of the size and have the characteristics that we need, that it will minimize the chance of something happening? We can't completely prevent that, because even in the types of storms we had this week,
not that
you could have had a very well maintained property, gone through all the steps, and still had a tree come down.
Yeah.
In the soil conditions, the siting, that was, just the way those winds were, and just maybe a normal wind, it might not have been a problem.
Yeah.
But the types of situations we had, that was moving telephone poles. There were no trees around to come down on the lines. There were poles sheared off and poles leaning over. And so very, very different situation there that we went through.
A couple of questions having to do with something you just said. A tree out in the middle of the yard. And we talked about this about a month or so. A tree growing out in the middle of the yard versus a tree growing in the woods. A tree growing in the woods is basically limited by the space around it with other trees.
Correct.
And so it's not going to have the girth. It's not going to have as deep a root, I would presume, because there are other trees competing for ground with it.
It still could have a good deep root system.
Would that root system intertwine with other trees that are around it?
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. But is a tree in that situation out in the woods, is it more likely to survive the same wind than a tree that was out in the middle of the yard and is much bigger and stronger, but is exposed more.
Right. You have more surface area there for that wind to hit against and push against when it's out in the open. When you have that forest of trees, you have a lot of supporting characters there. You have a lot of windbreaks to help soften that wind. And so things out, in that environment in the woods can actually hold up better. Yeah, of course, there are always exceptions to that.
Sure.
But because you've got a dead one here and a dead one there, there's so much competition out in the woods. It's a fight for who is going to outcompete the other. And you can walk in the woods and look at things, and there'll be a lot of trees that maybe started all at the same time, but there's several of them that either genetics, part of it, and just site conditions and soil conditions outcompeted the other group of seeds that fell and germinated and started to grow. So you always have that, you can have a lot of, and especially in Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania back at the turn of the century was almost completely logged. So all that regrowth was of a very similar age. But you might go in the woods and say, oh, why, these are not. But if you counted the rings, you'd find out that they were very similar.
Same
age-wise.
Same age, different neighborhood.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Side by side with a proper space between them, an oak tree, a maple tree. Maple trees are much more prolific around our area. There are more of them. But an oak tree and a maple tree side by side in the same area, maybe both exposed to the same elements. Is the oak tree, because it's such a stiffer wood, or its root structure different from a maple tree? And is one more likely to survive that harsh wind than another?
Yeah, now some species, so some of the oaks have more of a tap root that goes down in.
Yeah,
like a
that's what
carrot.
I was getting at.
And tulip poplar the same way has a tap root that goes down in. But you're right, the wood on a oak tree is of a different structure and usually more stout than that wood on either the maple or the tulip poplar. Tulip poplar can
they have more give in
break. Yeah, right. Yeah, you've got some more flexibility there. Yes. So depending on the wind that hits, you might still snap off the oak branch, and the other might stand, and then vice versa. It could easily go the other way. Our soil conditions will, also greatly influence that rootability. How extensive is that root system, that anchoring system to the ground? So you might have a tree along a bank that gets uprooted very easily because that root system's kind of a little bit odd because it's on a bank, or on the edge of the woods along a road, is a lot of times not as stable as one back in the woods a little bit, or in an area where it can root out better, and the moisture conditions, the clay content, even the shale, because we've got all those soils. Shaly content will influence the ability of that plant to the depth of the soil.
Hence, you see a perfectly strong and intact tree that is down because the ground around it couldn't hold it.
Yes, and we often in the spring when the ground's saturated, we'll see evergreens, drop over like a domino because the ground is saturated with soil. Those conifers don't tend to have as deep of a root system, and so you just see there's so much pressure put on because it has its foliage on there. And so you get those winds in combination with the soil being saturated, and those roots just get lifted up and the tree gets laid over.
Yeah. So, little tree talk here this morning on Indiana in the Morning with the storms.
Oddly enough, last Friday was Arbor Day.
Yeah, there you go. Let's talk in the time left with us this morning about soil runoff when you have heavy rains like that. Actually, the rains in the storm the other day were not that bad.
No.
Especially compared to some of the others that we have. But when you get soil runoff from a really heavy saturating rain, a hard rain, that can cause major problems, too, for your lawn, your garden, and everything else.
Yes. and especially once we get into the creeks and the streams and the rivers, we're moving all that sediment, soil, off-site. We had it where we wanted it. We may not have had the cover there that we needed, meaning something growing on it, whether it be trees or shrubs or turf, some sort of sod to help hold that soil in place. And so then it moves off-site, and so you lose your soil or some of it every time that happens. Plus then we get that sediment load going into our waterways, which is not good. And that goes downstream. And with those soil particles that go, there's nutrients attached to that. I know you can't see that. You can see the soil particles. You can see the structure of the soil.
The water knows it's there, though.
Yeah, but you can't see the nutrients that are held there. And so then when they get into that water, then they're going to get released. And so then that's where we start to get, issues with phosphorus and potassium and those other nutrients.
Somebody who has, say, a slight embankment at their house and they don't have a good cover on it, a nice heavy or thick grass or whatever ornamentals they have on it, they're more likely to lose that dirt.
Yes.
So around your house, especially if you've got one of those situations where you have a bit of a slope to the ground and you don't have a grass or even a mulch on it, there's a really good chance you're going to lose some ground there. So you ought to put something in there.
Right. So even if we don't have a living plant growing on there, even mulching and things like that can be helpful to help absorb that, to help keep things in place. And that goes back to there's a lot of conservation practices where if you're anywhere near a body of water, having a buffer strip there, having that sod, and we see that a lot around our area because we have a number of little creeks and streams and tributaries. Some of them are very, high quality waters for fishing, etc. But you'll see buffers there, and there's programs in place to help do that. Whether it be sod, and the wider the strip, the better, because if there is erosion, then it gets caught up in that buffer strip, in that sod waterway, in that stream bank that's covered. And then there's also stream bank, reforestation programs, because having trees along those streams, in addition to, a forage there or grass, that helps. It's another level of protection to help protect the stream, and then also things from moving into the stream.
Yeah, and of course that's why you see contour farming as well on our
absolutely.
Our
That's a huge key around here. Following the contour, those contours, they try to maintain those as level as they can out around the hill, instead of farming up and down the hill where we can get a lot of movement of soil in an event. Contour farming helps really minimize that.
All righty. There you go, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good conversation this morning.
The weekend of May 18th, we proudly recognize and celebrate the heroes of our nation's armed forces with Armed Forces Weekend with your